Hey friends, tonight we drift into a place that was never meant to feel calm, but somehow it always does once everyone leaves. The Colosseum, that enormous stone bowl right in the heart of Rome, designed to hold tens of thousands of voices, all shouting at once, and now so still, so empty, pretending nothing happened earlier. So, settle in. Let your shoulders relax. Let your breathing slow. Picture the last spectator stepping softly out into the Roman night, still whispering about who should have won, still carrying the faint smell of dust, of sweat, of roasted chestnuts. And behind them, the greatest entertainment machine of the ancient world quietly powers down. Because when the crowd went home, the Colosseum's real work began, handled, of course, by the quiet hands Rome preferred not to notice. Before we continue, I encourage you all, if this little journey helps you rest, feel free to like and subscribe, and share in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. The crowd never left all at once. That would have been too organized for Rome. Instead, people trickled out in waves. Wealthy senators wrapped in expensive cloaks, merchants loudly complaining about the price of seats, soldiers shoving their way through because waiting was not in their job description, and ordinary citizens moving slowly, their excitement fading into exhaustion. Vendors packed up stalls. Wine cups were abandoned. Someone, somewhere, was absolutely certain the referee had been bribed. Eventually, though, the sound changed. The roar softened into footsteps, footsteps into murmurs, murmurs into echoes. And then there was that moment, the one nobody ever wrote about, when the Colosseum realized it was alone again. Torches replaced sunlight. The great arches swallowed the glow, stretching shadows across the stone floors. And the arena, which had spent the day pretending to be a stage for glory and honor, went back to being what it really was, a logistical problem. The first people to enter weren't priests or officials. No ceremonial farewell, no dramatic speeches, just workers. Men whose names didn't matter to the state and wouldn't survive in history, but who knew the building better than anyone else. They came with rakes, buckets, scrapers, and the quiet understanding that the sand could not look like this by morning. The arena floor was designed for replacement. That wasn't an accident. The Romans were very good at designing things that accepted reality rather than fighting it. Blood soaked downward quickly, darkening the sand in irregular patches that no amount of optimism could hide. So the top layer was removed, sometimes all of it. Fresh sand, brought in earlier already waiting, was spread evenly, carefully, as if restoring a painting that had been deliberately ruined earlier that day. Rome preferred its violence clean, or at least clean-looking. The workers moved methodically, not rushing because tomorrow's games were already scheduled and panic would not improve anyone's situation. Broken weapons were gathered and set aside. Some would be repaired, some melted down, some quietly reassigned to the next unlucky participant. Efficiency was the real star of the show. Below the arena floor, the Hypogeum waited. If the Colosseum above was a performance, the Hypogeum was the backstage nightmare that made it possible. Cages, elevators powered by ropes and muscle, narrow corridors that smelled faintly of animals, oil, and fear. This was where the survivors went, not the crowd favorites. They got applause and sometimes medical care, but everyone else. Gladiators who lived through the day were checked quickly, not with concern exactly, more like inventory. Could they fight again? How soon? Were they still profitable? A wounded fighter who could recover was an asset. A wounded fighter who could not was an inconvenience. Rome had ways of dealing with inconvenience. Some men sat quietly, leaning against stone walls, too tired to speak, replaying the day in their minds with the kind of focus that only comes after almost dying. Others slept immediately, because the body sometimes decides consciousness is optional. And some stared into nothing at all, already trying to imagine a future that didn't involve sand and shouting, which was ambitious, honestly. The animals were handled with similar practicality. Rome loved exotic beasts, lions, bears, leopards, things dragged halfway across the known world because novelty was worth the effort. But novelty was expensive. Animals that survived were fed, watered, and restrained. Handlers made notes, not about bravery or spectacle, but about behavior. Too aggressive, too passive, unpredictable. Rome disliked unpredictable. Animals that could perform again were kept. Animals that could not were repurposed. Nothing went to waste. Not in an empire that understood logistics as well as conquest. By the time the moon was high over the city, the Colosseum was already transforming. Less arena, more warehouse. Above all of this, far removed from sand and cages and quiet suffering, the elite had already moved on. The emperor, whoever he happened to be that year, was back in his palace, eating dinner, listening to reports, pretending not to think about the games anymore. Publicly, at least. Privately, emperors were obsessed with appearances, and the games were appearances made of stone and scheduling. A successful day meant calm citizens. A calm city meant fewer problems. Fewer problems meant another day survived. The details didn't matter. The result did. Rome was very good at that kind of thinking. As the night deepened, the Colosseum grew quieter. Not silent. Rome was never truly silent, but subdued. Torches flickered, footsteps echoed occasionally, someone coughed, and the massive structure rested, like a beast that had eaten well and was now content to wait until it was hungry again. By morning, it would look pristine. Fresh sand, clean entrances, no sign of what happened before, because Rome believed very strongly in reset buttons. And tomorrow, there would be another crowd, another spectacle, another night where the Colosseum would wait patiently for everyone to leave again. And that's where we'll continue next time, with the people who never sat in the stands, never cheered, and never left, because the Colosseum was their entire world. When the Colosseum went quiet at night, it didn't empty completely. It never did. Because while the crowd went home to beds and wine and complaints about seating, there were people whose entire lives existed inside this structure. Not visitors, not spectators, residents. And no, Rome didn't advertise that part. The workers who stayed behind didn't think of the Colosseum as a monument. That was for poets and emperors. To them, it was a job site, a dangerous one, a loud one, and occasionally a lethal one. Some lived nearby, some slept in cramped quarters tucked into the building itself, stone rooms with low ceilings, shared beds, and no privacy whatsoever. Rome believed very strongly that if someone wasn't important, comfort was optional. These workers rose before sunrise. They knew exactly which gates would open first, which corridors filled fastest, and which animals were most likely to cause trouble. Experience wasn't rewarded with praise, it was rewarded with survival. Down in the Hypogeum, preparation began long before the crowd arrived. Lifts were tested, ropes checked, pulleys reinforced, because nothing ruined a spectacle like a lion refusing to appear on cue. The elevators, powered entirely by human muscle, were impressive, dangerous, and wildly unforgiving. One mistake, one misstep, and someone could lose fingers, or worse. But Rome loved engineering that pushed limits, especially when someone else paid the price. The gladiators who lived here weren't romantic heroes. That was a story invented later. In reality, they were property. Some were slaves, some were prisoners, some were volunteers who made a series of questionable life decisions and ended up here anyway. Their days followed a rhythm: training, eating, waiting. Waiting was the hardest part. Waiting to be called, waiting to be paired, waiting to see if today was performance or punishment. And at night, after the noise faded, the waiting got louder. In the quiet, thoughts didn't have competition. Some gladiators formed friendships, some rivalries, some kept entirely to themselves because attachment made loss worse. Rome didn't care which strategy they chose. They were all replaceable. Medical care existed, which surprises people.
Rome liked its investments to last. Doctors treated wounds carefully, not out of compassion, but efficiency. A healed gladiator could fight again, a dead one could not. Pain management was limited. Wine helped, herbs helped, endurance helped the most. If a wound was too severe, decisions were made quickly. Rome did not hesitate. Above them, the administrative machinery never slept. Officials tracked costs, attendance, public reaction. Did the crowd cheer loudly enough? Did they seem restless? Were rumors of dissatisfaction circulating? Because games were not just entertainment, they were public relations. Bread and circuses, after all. And the circuses required spreadsheets, well, wax tablets, full of numbers and names and tallies. Rome ran on bureaucracy. The Colosseum was just one more department. Sometimes, late at night, senators visited privately, not officially, quietly. They walked the empty stands, their sandals echoing on stone, imagining themselves generous patrons of the people. Some felt pride, some discomfort, most felt calculation. Was the crowd pleased? Was the emperor popular? Could this spectacle be leveraged politically? Rome never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. Outside the Colosseum, the city breathed differently at night. Rome was still awake, it always was, but slower. Lamps glowed softly. Streets smelled of smoke and leftovers. Some citizens slept, some drank, some worried about things they could not control. Inside the Colosseum, everything waited. The building itself seemed patient, as if it understood its role. Tomorrow it would roar again. Tonight it observed. Stone doesn't forget easily. There were rumors, of course. There were always rumors. Some said ghosts wandered the corridors, fallen gladiators, betrayed fighters, unlucky animals. Others said the building was cursed, that too much blood had soaked too deeply into the foundations. Rome listened politely and scheduled the next games anyway. Superstition was acceptable. Interruption was not. As dawn approached, the workers finished their tasks. Torches burned low. The sand lay smooth and untouched. The gates stood ready. From the outside, the Colosseum looked peaceful, almost dignified, which was impressive considering what it was built to do. And as the sun began to rise over Rome, the people who never went home prepared to do it all again, because the Colosseum did not exist for them. They existed for it.
Because before the crowd returned, before the animals were lifted into place, before anyone cheered, someone had to pay. And Rome was very serious about who got stuck with the bill. The Colosseum did not run on applause. It ran on money, an astonishing amount of it. Animals shipped from North Africa, gladiators trained, housed, fed, treated, workers paid, repairs made constantly, because stone and wood only tolerate so much enthusiasm. Someone always footed the cost. Sometimes it was the emperor, sometimes a wealthy official trying to look generous, sometimes a politician who desperately needed the public to forget something inconvenient, like a scandal, or a failed military campaign, or a suspicious number of missing tax records. Rome loved distractions. Funding the games was not optional generosity, it was political survival. If you held power and didn't provide entertainment, you were not seen as disciplined or responsible. You were seen as cheap, and nothing damaged a Roman reputation faster than appearing cheap. So senators emptied fortunes, emperors borrowed against the future, treasuries groaned quietly in the background, all to keep the crowd satisfied for one more afternoon. Rome didn't believe in long-term solutions. It believed in today. After the crowd went home, accountants took over. Wax tablets were checked, numbers adjusted, costs justified. How many animals were lost today? How many fighters survived? How much sand was replaced? The answers mattered, because the games were planned weeks, sometimes months in advance. And budgets, no matter how imperial, were still budgets. Rome pretended it had infinite resources, but even Rome had limits. It just hated admitting it. Some emperors loved the games, really loved them. Commodus, for example, who saw himself as a gladiator, because of course he did, spent absurd sums staging performances where he could safely win. Animals were restrained, opponents were instructed not to fight back, the crowd was required to applaud. And Rome smiled politely, because correcting the emperor was hazardous to one's health. The Colosseum accommodated this nonsense quietly. It always did. Other emperors hated the games. Philosophers, administrators, men who would rather read reports than watch blood soak into sand. Marcus Aurelius tolerated the games, but barely. He attended, he funded them, and then he mentally checked out, because ruling an empire was exhausting enough without pretending to enjoy staged death. Even so, he paid. They all paid, because refusing the games was not an option. Behind the scenes, the pressure was constant. Organizers had to deliver novelty. The crowd had seen everything: lions, bears, executions, mock battles. So expectations escalated. More animals, stranger animals, bigger spectacles. Someone once thought, why not flood the arena and stage a naval battle? And instead of being laughed out of the room, that person was promoted because Rome admired ambition, especially expensive ambition. After hours, the Colosseum reflected this excess. Crates stacked against walls, new cages installed, old mechanisms repaired. Everything expanded, and with expansion came risk. More animals meant more handlers meant more accidents meant more paperwork. Rome documented everything, even disaster. Not everyone approved. Some senators grumbled privately about costs, some philosophers questioned the morality. Some citizens quietly wondered why grain shortages kept happening while money flowed freely into spectacle. Rome listened, nodded, and scheduled another event, because nothing calmed public dissatisfaction like a distraction they didn't have to think about. As night settled again, the Colosseum rested under the weight of expectation. Tomorrow's games were already planned. Tomorrow's costs already committed. The crowd would return, unaware of the effort, unaware of the expense, unaware of the quiet panic behind the scenes. They would cheer, and Rome would smile, because the illusion mattered more than the truth. Now, we'll talk about the people the games were actually for. Not the crowd, not the emperor, but the idea of Rome itself, how the Colosseum became a symbol, and why symbols are often built on things no one wants to look at too closely. Because after the crowd went home, and after the workers finished cleaning, and after the accountants stopped arguing over numbers, the Colosseum did something subtle. It reminded Rome who was in charge. The Romans loved symbols. They pretended to be practical people, engineers, administrators, builders of roads and aqueducts. But they were deeply emotional about power. And the Colosseum was not just a venue. It was a message. Look how big we are. Look how organized. Look how much death we can manage without losing control. Very reassuring. Very unsettling. Perfectly Roman. The building itself enforced hierarchy. Where you sat mattered. A lot. The emperor had the best seat, obviously, because pretending otherwise would have been embarrassing. Senators sat close enough to be seen, close enough to be associated with power, but not so close that anyone forgot who was truly important. Ordinary citizens sat higher, women higher still. The poor, foreigners, and enslaved people were pushed to the margins. Rome loved order, especially when it looked natural. And after the crowd went home, that order remained. Empty seats still told a story. At night, officials sometimes walked the seating tiers deliberately, not to relax, to remember. This is where loyalty sits. This is where approval comes from. This is where discontent might start. The Colosseum doubled as a political map. You didn't need a census when you could watch a crowd react in real time. Cheers meant stability. Silence meant danger. Rome paid attention to silence. The symbolism extended to the arena itself. Life entered from below. Death exited quietly. The Hypogeum, dark, mechanical, hidden, fed spectacle upward. Visibility belonged to the winners. Invisibility handled the rest. Rome liked systems where unpleasant things happened out of sight. It made conscience easier to manage. Some elites found the symbolism comforting. Others found it disturbing. Pliny the Younger, polite and observant, attended games because it was expected, then wrote letters that carefully avoided enthusiasm. He described crowds, reactions, atmosphere, never joy, which tells you everything. Rome did not require love, it required participation. Philosophers had even harder time. Stoics in particular were deeply uncomfortable. They believed in discipline, restraint, internal strength. The games represented none of that. And yet Stoics still attended, because philosophy was personal, politics was not. Marcus Aurelius watched games he disliked because the empire required it. He wrote about self-control and virtue while funding spectacles built on chaos. Rome was very good at contradiction. At night, the Colosseum made these contradictions easier to see. Without the crowd, the scale felt different. Seats towered. The arena looked smaller. It became obvious that the building was not about individual fighters or animals. It was about scale. Rome liked things that dwarfed people. It helped everyone remember their place. The Colosseum also absorbed fear. Not theatrical fear, real fear. Fear of instability, fear of rebellion, fear that the empire was too large to control. By staging violence publicly, Rome told itself it understood violence, that it could schedule it, contain it, end it with a signal, which was optimistic. After the crowd went home, the Colosseum didn't echo with cheers, it echoed with questions. Could this always work? Would people always be satisfied? What happens when spectacle stops distracting? Rome didn't answer those questions. It preferred routine, and routine returned quickly. By morning, vendors would set up, the gates would open, the seats would be filled. People would sit where they were told, they would cheer when expected, they would leave believing they had witnessed something meaningful. The Colosseum would smile politely, because stone is very good at keeping secrets. Now, we'll talk about the things Rome pretended the Colosseum didn't do. The accidents, the failures, the moments when control slipped and the building reminded everyone that power is never as stable as it looks. Because for all Rome's obsession with order, the Colosseum was never perfectly under control. It just looked that way from a distance. And after the crowd went home, that illusion thinned. Rome loved to talk about discipline, Roman virtue, Roman order. But the Colosseum was a place where hundreds of moving parts had to behave perfectly, every single time, for nothing to go wrong. That's not a system, that's a gamble. And Rome gambled often. Accidents happened. Not dramatic, recorded for history accidents. Those were inconvenient, but small failures that rippled quietly. A rope frayed more than expected. A lift jammed halfway. A gate opened too soon. Animals did not always cooperate, which was shocking, apparently, considering they were wild creatures dragged into underground cages. Sometimes a beast burst out early. Sometimes it refused to move at all. Sometimes it turned on a handler instead of a gladiator. Those moments were handled quickly, not gently. Quickly. Rome did not pause spectacles for safety discussions. Workers paid the price. Handlers mauled. Laborers crushed by mechanisms that required perfect timing. Men pulled into darkness and not spoken of again. These deaths were not part of the show, so they were not remembered. No applause, no record, just replacement. The Colosseum was very good at absorbing loss without comment. Even gladiators occasionally disrupted the plan. Fights lasted too long, ended too fast, turned chaotic in ways the crowd didn't expect. A fighter who refused to go down. Another who surrendered too quickly. A crowd that disagreed with the official decision. The audience had opinions. Rome tolerated opinions until they threatened authority. Then the signal came. The trumpet sounded. The moment ended. Control restored. At least, visibly. Sometimes the crowd itself became the problem. Rome packed tens of thousands of people into stone seating, gave them wine, gave them excitement, and assumed everything would be fine. Mostly it was, until it wasn't. Arguments turned physical. Sections shouted at each other. Class divisions surfaced loudly. There were riots. Small ones, contained ones, but enough to make officials nervous. Afterward, seating arrangements were adjusted, rules tightened, guards reassigned. Rome learned, then pretended it always knew. Weather caused problems too. Rain soaked the sand. Heat exhausted fighters and animals alike. Wind carried dust into places it shouldn't have been. The Colosseum had awnings, ingenious fabric structures that shaded the crowd. They helped. They also failed. When they did, workers scrambled, ropes snapped, and Rome learned again that engineering is not the same as certainty. And then there were the fires. Rome burned often. That was not new. The Colosseum, despite its stone, contained plenty of wood, scaffolding, seating elements, machinery. Fires were feared quietly. At night, guards patrolled carefully. Torches were monitored. Water kept close. Because a fire in the Colosseum would not just be damage, it would be symbolic. Rome could tolerate decay. It could not tolerate embarrassment. After incidents, silence followed. No announcements, no explanations. Repairs happened at night. Sand was replaced. Schedules adjusted. By morning, everything appeared normal. Rome believed strongly that problems solved quietly were problems that never truly existed. The Colosseum, though, remembered. Stone always does. Cracks were patched, mechanisms reinforced, procedures rewritten. Each fix a reminder that control was earned daily, not granted forever. As the night deepened, the building settled again. Workers moved slower, guards leaned on spears. The city beyond the walls breathed in sleep. Tomorrow would bring another crowd, another performance, another careful balancing act between spectacle and disaster. And Rome would pretend, once more, that it had everything exactly as planned. Now, we'll look at the people who tried to resist the Colosseum, philosophers, critics, and quiet dissenters, and why none of them ever truly won. We drift a little deeper. Not the seats, not the sand, not the roaring crowd. Nope. Tonight we're going backstage, or maybe below stage, where the Colosseum hums quietly, long after the spectators are gone. Above you, empty stone seats stretch endlessly, casting tall shadows that almost feel alive. And somewhere far away, the city sleeps. But down here, the empire never really does. Let's start with the people who keep it all together. The administrators, accountants, scribes. Yeah, all those people you'd never think about while watching gladiators fight. They track every coin, every crate, every single lion, or maybe leopard, that somehow survived the day. Not because they care about animals, or people, or justice. No. They do it because Rome is obsessed with knowing exactly what it owns. Picture them hunched over wax tablets, flickering torchlight reflecting off tired eyes. Columns of numbers. Columns of losses. Columns of, well, things you really wouldn't want to think about if you were eating dinner. Every mistake corrected quietly, every plan double-checked, because tomorrow's games are already on the schedule. And Rome, well, Rome doesn't like surprises. Meanwhile, somewhere in small, low-ceilinged rooms, the workers sleep, or try to. Some share beds, some share rooms with the smell of animals. It's not luxurious, it's not even really comfortable, but hey, survival beats comfort, right? And when sunrise hits, they're up again. Rakes, buckets, scrapers, the quiet heroes of sand and stone. Gladiators, of course, are part of this backstage ballet too. Not heroes, not legends, just property with endurance. They wait, they train, they recover. The strongest fight again. The weakest quietly vanish from the schedule. Rome doesn't mourn, Rome doesn't pause. You can imagine some poor guy lying on a bench thinking, well, I survived yesterday, that's something. And that's the daily optimism of the arena. The animals, oh yes, the animals. Exotic beasts shipped from half the known world. Lions, bears, leopards, probably a confused ostrich or two. If they survive, they get fed. If not, well, Rome has ways of reassigning resources. Handlers take meticulous notes on behavior because only predictable animals are worth keeping alive. Unpredictable ones, politely retired. Rome ever wastes money on surprises. And then there's the stone itself. The Colosseum doesn't just watch silently. It remembers. Every small failure, every rope frayed, every gate that opened too soon, etched into its structure. It hums quietly with the knowledge that chaos can always return. And yet, it waits patiently. For the next crowd, the next spectacle, the next day where everything appears perfectly ordered, even if it's not. Above all of this, emperors sleep in distant palaces, some obsessed with appearances, some indifferent, pretending that the massive, expensive show doesn't consume a fortune of their citizens' taxes. Either way, below them, the Colosseum moves quietly, keeping Rome's priorities straight. Numbers, sand, people, and animals all accounted for, all contained, all ready for tomorrow. Below the sand, past the arches, through corridors that smell faintly of, well, everything. This is where the Colosseum actually lives when the crowd is gone. Gladiators aren't heroes down here. No cheering, no applause, no chance to look dramatic in slow motion. They're inventory, property of the empire. Some were slaves, some prisoners, some people who thought signing up for this was a clever idea. It wasn't. They wait, they train, they heal, they plot in whispers. Or they don't plot at all, because some of them are smart enough to know that thinking too much is dangerous. And yet, when the crowd isn't watching, the reality seeps in. The Colosseum doesn't care about courage. It cares about survival and predictability. Above them, in the same stone halls, the officials do their late-night work. Wax tablets filled with numbers, expenses, and complaints. Every injury, every animal lost, every gladiator who might or might not show up tomorrow. Because Rome is all about appearances, even when it costs more than anyone really wants to admit. And the animals. Of course, the animals. Lions, bears, leopards, sometimes a confused ostrich or two. Fed, watered, restrained. Behavior carefully noted. Aggressive? Too unpredictable? Politely retired or repurposed. Rome doesn't waste unpredictability. Efficiency is the real star here. Above all, the Hypogeum moves with the calm of inevitability. Each step, each rope, each cage synchronized like a breathing organism. And the Colosseum above hums, patient, waiting for the next day, the next crowd, the next chaos that will somehow look perfectly ordered. And somewhere in distant palaces, emperors sleep, some obsessed with appearances, some indifferent. But down here, the empire is alive in quiet movement. Numbers, sand, humans, and animals, all aligned like a very precise, slightly terrifying clockwork. Next, we wander even deeper into the Hypogeum. That's the underground network of corridors, cages, and lifts you never see in postcards. The place that makes all the spectacle above possible, quietly, efficiently, terrifyingly. The Hypogeum is not glamorous. No marble floors, no cheering crowds, just stone, ropes, wood, and the faint scent of animals. And humans. Always humans, nervously moving through narrow corridors, carrying crates, checking cages, making sure nothing goes wrong tomorrow. Lifts powered entirely by human muscle, elevators of ropes and pulleys. One wrong move and someone loses a finger or worse. And yet, every day, it works. Because Rome loves engineering, especially when someone else pays the price for it. Safety is optional. Precision is mandatory. Gladiators here aren't preparing for fame. They're preparing to exist another day. A sword in the right hand, a shield that has seen better days, and the constant reminder that if they fail, they vanish from history and the schedule. Some lie quietly against stone walls, replaying every move from yesterday, calculating every mistake, while others sleep as if consciousness were optional. And some stare into nothing, imagining a future that doesn't involve sand, shouting, or death. Ambitious, really, considering the odds. Animals, too, are watched with quiet precision. Lions, bears, leopards, sometimes a confused ostrich or two. Fed, watered, restrained. Behavior carefully noted. Aggressive? Too unpredictable? Politely retired or repurposed. Rome doesn't waste unpredictability. Efficiency is the real star here. Above all, the Hypogeum moves with the calm of inevitability. Each step, each rope, each cage synchronized like a breathing organism. And the Colosseum above hums, patient, waiting for the next day, the next crowd, the next chaos that will somehow look perfectly ordered. And somewhere in distant palaces, emperors sleep, some obsessed with appearances, some indifferent. But down here, the empire is alive in quiet movement. Numbers, sand, humans, and animals, all aligned like a very precise, slightly terrifying clockwork. Next, we wander into the corners of the Colosseum that not everyone wanted to see. Not the Hypogeum, not the sand, but the ideas that simmered quietly while the crowds roared. See, Rome wasn't just about spectacle. It was about control. And for every lion, every gladiator, every meticulously calculated expense, there were people, philosophers, critics, observers, who quietly disagreed. Stoics, in particular, had a very rough time here. Marcus Aurelius, for example, yes, the philosopher emperor, attended the games, and he hated almost everything about them. He scribbled in secret, probably thinking, well, I'm funding all this chaos, but let's pretend I'm stoic about it. And while he wore his best public face, inside he might have been imagining a quiet garden far from blood-soaked sand. Other philosophers did similar mental gymnastics. Some argued about morality, some questioned whether entertaining the masses with death was really worth the olive oil budget. Others just shook their heads, silently counting the cost of every exotic animal dragged halfway across the empire. Rome tolerated dissent as long as it didn't interrupt the show. So critiques existed, quietly tucked into letters, conversations, and private sighs. Senators, too, had opinions, mostly about money, appearances, and social leverage. Some worried the crowd would riot if their favorite beast didn't roar on cue. Some worried about their own popularity, and some probably worried that the Colosseum itself was too big and scary, and maybe one day it would remember all the mistakes made under its arches. which of course it already did. And while these critics murmured in shadows, the Colosseum carried on its silent work. Every crack, every mechanism, every lift and rope, ready for another day. No one paid attention to the quiet oversight. They didn't have to. Stone doesn't argue back. Stone doesn't complain. Stone just waits. Meanwhile, the people in charge, well, they had their own private worries. Accountants quietly debated numbers under torchlight. Officials rechecked arrangements. Emperors slept uneasily, knowing that appearances, while crucial, were delicate. Because a minor misstep, an angry crowd, a misbehaving lion, a miscounted gladiator could undo months of planning. Rome loved the illusion of control, and part of that illusion lived here, unseen in these quiet corridors. And the best part? None of the critics, philosophers, or quiet dissenters ever truly won. The Colosseum ignored their complaints. It ignored their morality. It ignored their arguments. It waited. And tomorrow, it roared again. Next, we wander through the quiet aftermath of mistakes nobody wanted anyone to notice. Because for all Rome's obsession with order, control, and appearances, things occasionally slipped, and the Colosseum remembered. Accidents happened, not the dramatic history book kind, but the small, persistent, quietly terrifying ones. A rope frayed, a jam lift halfway, a gate opened too soon, a lion decided to stretch its legs in the wrong direction, and somewhere below, a gladiator probably muttered a few choice words before realizing muttering would not save him. Workers paid the price, handlers mauled, fingers lost, men vanished quietly into darkness. No applause, no record, just replacement. The Colosseum absorbed the loss like it had a spine of stone and indifference. It learned, and it waited. Fires were another story. Despite the stone, there was plenty of wood, scaffolding, seating elements, machinery. A careless torch could have spelled disaster. So guards patrolled carefully, water kept close, everything checked, double-checked. Because Rome could tolerate decay, it could not tolerate embarrassment. Weather, too, played a subtle role. Rain soaked the sand, heat exhausted fighters and animals. Wind carried dust into places it shouldn't. The Colosseum had awnings, ingenious fabric structures that helped. Sometimes they failed. And when they did, the quiet scramble below stairs, in corridors and through cages became a dance of almost perfection. Rome tolerated minor chaos, as long as it didn't break the illusion above. Every repair, every adjustment, every tiny failure was documented. Wax tablets filled with careful notes, numbers recalculated, mechanisms reinforced, procedures rewritten. Every small slip was a reminder control is earned daily, not granted forever. And yet, despite all this, by morning the arena looked flawless. Fresh sand, clean entrances, no evidence of yesterday's chaos. Rome believed strongly in reset buttons. And the Colosseum, well, it had its own memory, quietly noting every crack, every frayed rope, every slightly crooked gate. It waited, patient, for the next crowd. Next, we wander into the corners of the Colosseum that not everyone wanted to see. Not the Hypogeum, not the sand, but the ideas that simmered quietly while the crowds roared. See, Rome wasn't just about spectacle, it was about control. And for every lion, every gladiator, every meticulously calculated expense, there were people, philosophers, critics, observers, who quietly disagreed. Stoics, in particular, had a very rough time here. Marcus Aurelius, for example, yes, the philosopher emperor, attended the games, and he hated almost everything about them. He scribbled in secret, probably thinking, well, I'm funding all this chaos, but let's pretend I'm stoic about it. And while he wore his best public face, inside he might have been imagining a quiet garden far from blood-soaked sand. Other philosophers did similar mental gymnastics. Some argued about morality, some questioned whether entertaining the masses with death was really worth the olive oil budget. Others just shook their heads, silently counting the cost of every exotic animal dragged halfway across the empire. Rome tolerated dissent as long as it didn't interrupt the show. So critiques existed, quietly tucked into letters, conversations, and private sighs. Senators, too, had opinions, mostly about money, appearances, and social leverage. Some worried the crowd would riot if their favorite beast didn't roar on cue. Some worried about their own popularity, and some probably worried that the Colosseum itself was too big and scary, and maybe one day it would remember all the mistakes made under its arches, which of course it already did. And while these critics murmured in shadows, the Colosseum carried on its silent work. Every crack, every mechanism, every lift and rope, ready for another day. No one paid attention to the quiet oversight. They didn't have to. Stone doesn't argue back. Stone doesn't complain. Stone just waits. Meanwhile, the people in charge, well, they had their own private worries. Accountants quietly debated numbers under torchlight. Officials rechecked arrangements. Emperors slept uneasily, knowing that appearances, while crucial, were delicate. Because a minor misstep, an angry crowd, a misbehaving lion, a miscounted gladiator could undo months of planning. Rome loved the illusion of control, and part of that illusion lived here, unseen in these quiet corridors. And the best part? None of the critics, philosophers, or quiet dissenters ever truly won. The Colosseum ignored their complaints. It ignored their morality. It ignored their arguments. It waited. And tomorrow, it roared again. Next, we wander through the quiet aftermath of mistakes nobody wanted anyone to notice. Because for all Rome's obsession with order, control, and appearances, things occasionally slipped, and the Colosseum remembered. Accidents happened, not the dramatic history book kind, but the small, persistent, quietly terrifying ones. A rope frayed, a jam lift halfway, a gate opened too soon, a lion decided to stretch its legs in the wrong direction. And somewhere below, a gladiator probably muttered a few choice words before realizing muttering would not save him. Workers paid the price. Handlers mauled, fingers lost, men vanished quietly into darkness. No applause, no record, just replacement. The Colosseum absorbed the loss like it had a spine of stone and indifference. It learned, and it waited. Fires were another story. Despite the stone, there was plenty of wood, scaffolding, seating elements, machinery. A careless torch could have spelled disaster. So guards patrolled carefully, water kept close, everything checked, double-checked. Because Rome could tolerate decay, it could not tolerate embarrassment. Weather, too, played a subtle role. Rain soaked the sand, heat exhausted fighters and animals. Wind carried dust into places it shouldn't. The Colosseum had awnings, ingenious fabric structures that helped. Sometimes they failed. And when they did, the quiet scramble below stairs, in corridors and through cages became a dance of almost perfection. Rome tolerated minor chaos, as long as it didn't break the illusion above. Every repair, every adjustment, every tiny failure was documented. Wax tablets filled with careful notes, numbers recalculated, mechanisms reinforced, procedures rewritten. Every small slip was a reminder control is earned daily, not granted forever. And yet, despite all this, by morning the arena looked flawless. Fresh sand, clean entrances, no evidence of yesterday's chaos. Rome believed strongly in reset buttons. And the Colosseum, well, it had its own memory, quietly noting every crack, every frayed rope, every slightly crooked gate. It waited, patient, for the next crowd. Next, we linger in the quiet shadows of the Colosseum, the part of the building nobody notices until it watches them. By now, the arena is empty, sand replaced, gates secured, torches flickering softly along the arches. The crowd has gone home, and yet the building still speaks, not in words, but in scale, in silence, in subtle pressure. Every seat tells a story. Ordinary citizens high above, women slightly higher, the poor, foreigners, and enslaved pushed to the edges. The emperor, obviously front row, because appearances matter. And this is the language of power the stone itself whispers. Step closer to the arena floor. Notice how the shadows of arches stretch across the sand. The space feels enormous, yet intimate. Because the Colosseum isn't just about physical size, it's about psychological impact. How small you feel when you realize the entire empire is quietly watching, even when it's empty. Above, the tiers of seats are carefully arranged, hierarchies encoded into stone. You don't need a census here. The building remembers. It enforces order, and it subtly reminds everyone, even the people who think they're free, of their place in the empire. The Hypogeum below hums softly. Elevators, ropes, cages, and pulleys, quiet now, waiting for tomorrow. Mechanisms reinforced, procedures rehearsed, workers' routines silently observed by the stone. It's an orchestra of control, playing without audience, without applause, just patience. And the emperor, somewhere distant in marble chambers, eats, sleeps, and schemes, because Rome loves appearances, and the Colosseum is the ultimate stage for the empire's message, a perfectly choreographed illusion, even when things go wrong. Philosophers, stoics, and critics, they whispered dissent in shadowed corridors. They muttered about morality, spectacle, cost, and cruelty. The Colosseum listened patiently. It didn't argue. It simply waited for the next day. Now, relax your shoulders, slow your breathing. Feel the stone beneath your feet, the cool air brushing your skin, and imagine the emptiness here, but not lifeless. Everything is alive, watching, learning, because the Colosseum is more than a building. It's a quiet observer, a teacher of scale, patience, and control. And tonight it hums softly, preparing for tomorrow, ready to remind everyone who's really in charge, long after the crowds have vanished. Next, we slip even deeper into the quiet rhythms of the Colosseum, the life that hums softly after the crowds have gone. The sand has been replaced, gates secured, animals fed and resting in their cages, and somewhere below, the Hypogeum waits, silent but never still. Workers begin their nightly routines, not grand, not celebrated, not seen. Rakes scrape the sand carefully, smoothing every ridge. Buckets carried down narrow corridors, clinking softly in the dim torchlight. Scrapers remove traces of yesterday's battles. Even the smallest grain is accounted for. Gladiators follow their own rhythm. Some sleep immediately, exhausted, curled in corners of the Hypogeum. Others replay the day in their minds, every movement, every clash, every decision, analyzing, planning, rehearsing silently for tomorrow. And if you listen closely, you can hear their breaths, slow, measured, almost in sync with the stone itself. Meanwhile, animal handlers check on lions, bears, and exotic beasts. Some pace nervously, others lie in quiet repose. Every movement, every sniff, every restless paw is noted in small journals. Behavior observed, patterns recorded. Because unpredictability is expensive, and Rome does not tolerate unnecessary risk. Above all, the Colosseum moves like a living organism. Ropes tighten, elevators tested, cages inspected. Everything is accounted for quietly, methodically, without panic. Somewhere in the shadows, supervisors move silently, not to watch the workers, but to maintain the illusion of calm. Because chaos may have happened during the day, but at night, control must feel absolute, even for a few hours. And tonight, you can imagine yourself walking among them. Step softly over the cold stone. Feel the faint warmth of a torch brushing past. Hear the distant scrape of sand, the gentle rumble of a cage. Everything moves slowly, patiently, carefully. Because tomorrow, the spectacle returns. But tonight, everything is quiet, measured, restful. Next, we linger in the quieter corners where Rome's exotic beasts rest, away from the roar of the crowds, away from the flashing torches of spectacle. Lions, bears, leopards, creatures dragged across half the known world, all carefully tended, all quietly observed. They move in cages beneath the arena, paws padding softly on stone, nostrils twitching at the scents of humans and sand. Handlers move among them with practiced care, not out of affection. Rome is rarely sentimental, but out of efficiency. A lion that refuses to perform is expensive. A leopard that bites the wrong person is even more so. Every twitch, every yawn, every subtle sign of mood is recorded. Some beasts are calm, almost regal. Others restless, testing the boundaries of ropes and cages. Notes are taken, aggressive, passive, unpredictable. Rome dislikes unpredictability. It prefers animals that can perform on cue, that obey invisible rules, that teach spectators quietly, that control exists even in the wild. And yet, in the silence of night, the creatures have their own rhythm. Some sleep, sprawled across straw bedding. Some pace, quietly asserting presence. Some watch the humans with what might almost be curiosity if anyone were trained to notice. Meanwhile, the Colosseum watches too. Its stone arches, and corridors absorb every sound, every paw step, every creak of cage wood, every low growl. It learns the rhythm of the beasts, just as it learns the rhythm of humans. Above ground, the sand rests, smooth and unbroken. Below, the Hypogeum hums softly with the quiet life of its inhabitants. Animals, workers, gladiators, all part of the same unseen choreography. And tonight, you can imagine walking past them. Soft footsteps on stone, the faint scent of straw and leather, a lion's low rumble in the distance, almost hypnotic. Every sound, every movement absorbed into the patience of the Colosseum itself. Because tomorrow, the spectacle will return. But tonight, the beasts teach a subtle lesson. Even chaos can be managed if observed, noted, and respected. And if you breathe slowly, you can almost feel it. Next, we drift into the quieter shadows of the Colosseum, where not everything went according to plan, and yet no one outside ever needed to know. During the day, accidents happened. A lift jammed halfway, a rope frayed, a gate opened too soon. Animals sometimes misbehaved. Gladiators occasionally refused to follow the expected script. None of it made the headlines. None of it disrupted the carefully maintained illusion. At night, the workers moved silently among the aftermath. Small fires were doused with buckets of water, charred wood replaced before dawn. Broken mechanisms were repaired or reinforced, sand smoothed again, everything reset. And the Colosseum, it remembered. Stone always remembers. Every crack, every scorch, every frayed rope, cataloged silently in its walls. Lessons learned, protocols adjusted, minor disasters contained without spectacle. Some accidents were larger. A cage might break, a pulley snap might send a crate tumbling, a gladiator could be injured unexpectedly. Even then, Rome's solution was quiet, efficient, and invisible. No announcements, no ceremony, just repair, replacement, reset. Above, the torches flickered. Workers moved slowly, deliberately. A gentle scrape of metal, the soft thud of repaired equipment being set back into place. Everything calibrated, prepared for tomorrow. And tonight, you could imagine yourself walking through these corridors, hearing the faint crackle of a fire long extinguished, feeling the cool stone beneath your fingertips, watching the shadows of repairs stretch across the walls. Everything is patient, everything is methodical, everything is hidden. Because tomorrow, the Colosseum will roar again. The accidents, the repairs, the small chaos, none of it will be seen. And for now, in the quiet, the building teaches you a subtle lesson. Control is earned, maintained, and remembered, even when no one notices. Next, we drift above the arena floor, into the marble halls and private chambers where emperors watched, ate, and schemed long after the crowd's cheers faded. Some emperors loved the games, really loved them. Commodus, for example, thought himself a gladiator, because, of course, he did. He insisted on performing safely, of course, but the spectacle had to revolve around him. Animals restrained, opponents instructed. The crowd? Well, they had to cheer. Every move choreographed to satisfy the emperor's vanity, and everyone around him quietly endured the absurdity. Others hated it. Philosophers, administrators, men who preferred scrolls to sand, who would rather be solving tax disputes or reading poetry. Marcus Aurelius, for example, stoic, tired, human, attended anyway. He funded the games, nodded politely, and checked out mentally, because refusing wasn't an option. The empire required it. The illusion demanded it. And yet, even in the quiet of the night, every detail mattered. A minor misalignment of the seating hierarchy, an animal behaving out of turn, or a gladiator refusing to follow instructions could be recorded, reported, and subtly corrected. Some emperors were obsessive about appearances. Every lion, every cage, every rope tension noted. A misplaced torch could ruin the aesthetic. Even the sand had to be pristine before the first spectator arrived, because Rome believed deeply that illusion was stronger than reality. And tonight, you can imagine yourself quietly observing, walking through the emperor's chamber, seeing scrolls of accounts, lists of gladiators, notes about crowd behavior. Every detail cataloged, every move calculated, everything designed to ensure tomorrow's spectacle ran smoothly, even if it killed a few nerves along the way. The Colosseum and the emperor, two masters of patience and control, each feeding the other's obsession. One in stone, unyielding; one in flesh, vain, calculating. Next, we drift into the corners of the Colosseum where whispers linger, where the voices of those who quietly disagreed still seem to echo. Not everyone loved the games. Some philosophers, Stoics in particular, watched with furrowed brows, scribbling notes in the shadows, questioning morality, order, and the empire's obsession with blood. They wrote letters, sometimes polite, sometimes sharp, but always careful. Criticizing too loudly could end poorly. Some senators muttered about costs, efficiency, and public perception. They paced the empty seating tiers at night, sand crunching under their sandals, imagining the ideal balance of spectacle and control. Most had no power to change the games. They had influence, maybe, but the Colosseum reminded them control is subtle, patient, and rarely given freely. And then there were rumors. Ghosts, they said, wandered the Hypogeum. Fallen gladiators, animals that had died mysteriously. Some corridors supposedly cursed, soaked with too much blood and suffering. Rome listened politely, recorded nothing, scheduled the next games anyway. Superstition was acceptable, disruption was not. Yet, in the quiet night, dissent found its own rhythm. A philosopher pacing in the dark, a critic taking meticulous notes, a stoic watching torches flicker across arches. All unseen, all unheard, except by the Colosseum itself. The building absorbed these silent protests, turning them into a kind of soft, hidden order. It remembered everything, every objection, every whispered criticism, cataloged quietly alongside sand, stone, and shadow. And tonight, you can imagine yourself moving among them. Soft footsteps along stone corridors, the faint rustle of robes, the gentle scratching of a quill on parchment. Every sound measured, every movement absorbed by the patience of the Colosseum. Next, we drift into the quiet corridors of money, where the Colosseum's roar is replaced by the soft scratching of wax tablets, the shuffle of coins, and the faint rustle of ledgers. The games didn't run on applause. They ran on money. An astonishing, almost ridiculous amount of it. Exotic animals shipped from North Africa. Gladiators trained, housed, fed, and healed. Wood and stone repaired endlessly. Workers paid, all meticulously accounted for. Sometimes the emperor footed the bill. Sometimes wealthy officials tried to look generous. Sometimes politicians spent fortunes to distract the public from scandals, failed campaigns, or mysterious tax shortfalls. Rome loved a good distraction, and nothing distracted like lions, gladiators, and carefully orchestrated chaos. Accounting was relentless. After the crowd went home, clerks worked late into the night. Wax tablets scratched with numbers, tallies double-checked, animals counted, gladiators inventoried, costs justified, budgets balanced, or at least hidden behind impressive numbers. And the Colosseum absorbed it all. It didn't care if an emperor was extravagant or stingy. It didn't mind if an official miscalculated or embezzled. The stone watched quietly, recording efficiency and excess alike. Some emperors were obsessive. Commodus, for instance, loved lavish performances where he could safely win. Opponents restrained, animals controlled, the crowd required to cheer. Every coin spent mattered to him, less for the empire, more for his ego. Others were reluctant financiers. Marcus Aurelius, tired and patient, funded the games without enthusiasm, a stoic at heart, calculating the necessary cost of keeping the city calm. No enthusiasm needed, just the numbers, just the illusion of control. And tonight, you can imagine walking past the ledgers. Faint candlelight flickers across wax tablets. A clerk scratches numbers carefully, quietly muttering under breath. Coins counted, notes recorded, calculations checked. Every cent accounted for, because tomorrow's games will need it. Money, like stone, teaches patience. It reminds the empire that nothing is free, even spectacle, even illusion. Next, we drift back up to the empty stands, the tiers that once roared with tens of thousands of voices, and consider the invisible threads Rome used to shape every reaction. The crowd never really ran the Colosseum. It was never allowed. Every cheer, every gasp, every groan carefully orchestrated, even when it seemed spontaneous. Seating arrangements dictated social hierarchy. Wine flowed at calculated intervals. Animals, fights, and spectacles timed for maximum effect. Arguments occasionally erupted. Sections shouted at each other. Class distinctions flared briefly in heated whispers. Minor riots sometimes broke out. And then, officials moved silently. Rules tightened, guards subtly reassigned, order restored, as if it had never been broken at all. And the Colosseum, it watched quietly, absorbing patterns in human behavior. How the crowd reacted to violence, to novelty, to injustice. It learned when to allow chaos and when to contain it. The psychology of spectators was not just entertainment, it was politics, a distraction from hunger, taxation, or a discontented public. Bread and circuses indeed. The crowd believed it had choice. Rome made sure it never did. Tonight, imagine sitting high in the empty stands, the stone beneath your fingers cool, rows of seats stretching endlessly around you. Whispers of past cheers and boos still echo faintly in the arches. You can almost sense the subtle tension of controlled chaos, the invisible hand of planning that shaped every breath of the crowd. And the beauty, or terror of it, no one outside ever noticed. Every spectator thought they were witnessing freedom. The illusion was perfect. The Colosseum taught patience, control, observation. Next, we drift into the subtler shadows, the quiet corners where the Colosseum whispered secrets, and rituals that shaped more than just entertainment took place. The games were never just games. Every fight, every display, every animal brought into the arena carried meaning, symbols of power, order, control, even morality, though sometimes a very dark morality. Some rituals were obvious: trumpets before the first gladiator stepped forward, processions of animals and men, announcements of the emperor's presence meticulously timed. Every gesture meant to reinforce authority, hierarchy, and social order. Others were hidden, quiet ceremonies among workers and handlers, private inspections of cages and weapons, secret calculations about who would survive, who would perform, who would quietly be removed from the equation. Symbols understood only by those who participated. Small gestures, tiny modifications, hints of superstition. And the Colosseum, it remembered every ritual, no matter how small. Every torch lit at the correct angle, every rope tensioned just so, every ceremonial pause in the sand. Stone absorbs intent as well as action. Tonight, imagine walking along the arena floor in the quiet night. No crowd, no cheering, only the whisper of stone and shadows. You notice the placement of torches, the careful alignment of sand and gates, the subtle markers that told insiders who was to perform, when, and how. Some rituals served superstition. The right pattern of sand could bring luck. The proper handling of a lion could prevent disaster. A gladiator might receive a silent blessing or warning from a supervisor. Every act intentional, every symbol layered with meaning. And yet, to the outside world, it all looked like chaos and spectacle. But those in the know, they understood patience, preparation, and power hidden behind appearances. The Colosseum taught quiet lessons, not in blood or applause, but in the careful choreography of ritual and control. Next, we arrive at the quietest part of our journey, where the Colosseum stands still, and we reflect on everything it has witnessed. The crowds have gone, the gladiators rest or recover. Animals are fed, cages secured, sand smooth again, stone cooled by night air. And yet, the Colosseum remembers. It remembers every cheer, every roar, every argument, every subtle gesture of control, every whispered complaint, every hidden ritual, every meticulous calculation, every empire, every emperor, every fleeting human life that crossed its floors. This is its legacy, not as a monument of violence, not as a stage of blood, but as a structure that holds memory, patience, order, endurance. It has survived centuries, long after the empires that built it, long after the games that defined it. And tonight, you can imagine walking through it one last time. Soft footsteps on cold stone, empty seats stretching endlessly around you, the faint scent of history in the air, whispers of the past, almost imperceptible, the quiet patience of stone that has absorbed more than any human mind could comprehend. The Colosseum teaches a subtle lesson. Everything ends, even spectacle, even chaos, even empires. But what remains, memory, structure, order, can endure, even quietly, even silently, even when no one notices. So, relax your shoulders, slow your breathing, feel the weight of time, the patient endurance of stone, and the soft echo of history settling into the quiet night. And you can rest too. The Colosseum waits. Tomorrow it will witness the world again. Tonight it simply rests. And now, so can you.